Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a nice little three-game slate for college basketball. Duke, Virginia Tech, New Mexico versus Nevada, and Kansas versus Baylor. So all three of these games have very tight, as in they're all within 3 points spreads. All three of these games look like they're going to be pretty similar in the scoring department as well. The Duke-Virginia Tech game is slightly lower than the other two, but overall, I feel like all three games are pretty much in similar situations. I do think the best priced and valued plays come from the New Mexico Nevada players. There are some good players on the other teams, but they seem to have the best overall. And so I would say the best look today is to do kind of a small New Mexico Nevada stack with a couple mixtures of Kansas and maybe Duke players, as well as maybe a Virginia Tech player. So let's go ahead and get into the picks I like the best. First, we're going to start with guards, and we're going to start with Keenan Blackshear for Nevada. Now, he's averaging almost 30 fantasy points a game. He's a little bit streaky, but he usually scores in the mid-20s, or the mid to high 20s rather. He's had some big games as well, and just two under 20 fantasy points all season long. Though you will note that the last game that he played in was in that situation. But this should be a nice high-scoring game, so he should be good to go here. The only thing with him is he doesn't get a ton of peripheral points, which obviously isn't ideal. Like steals and rebounds and stuff like that. Jalen House. For New Mexico. Seems like he's pretty solidly priced here. He's only had a few games under 30 fantasy points all season long. Probably the best player on the slate when it comes to just point per dollar. He has played really well, averaging 36 fantasy points per game on the season. He's in a really good spot here, and I like him in this matchup. He should be good to go and a top-tier option. Then we'll look at J-Rod Lucas for Nevada. Now, his price is nice and cheap, but he also plays 35 minutes a game most nights. He is averaging about 23 fantasy points per game. He does have a little bit of a lower floor than I tend to like, but overall, on a small slate like this, he does have a pretty good upside here. The only real risk here is that he tends to not get big numbers in the rebounds and assist situations, so he is pretty point reliant. But at his price point, he's viable on the slate with how he's doing and with the lack of better options available. Then we'll look at Jamal Mashburn Jr. for New Mexico. Now, he is at a very good price point at $7,200. I wish he was a little bit lower. If you're having to choose between him and Blackshear, I'm probably going to go Blackshear just ever so slightly, but he is averaging in a similar aspect around the mid to high 20s per game. He just doesn't quite have as many big games, over 30 fantasy point games as Blackshear does. But overall, they're both really good options, and he's been pretty solid all season long. And kind of look at it from the perspective of which team you think is going to be at the lead near the end, where they're going to have the opportunity to gain most points. And I think that Blackshear probably takes that just barely. Then we'll look at Jeremy Roach for Duke at $5,100. Now, he's not super ideal here, but he does have some upside in this matchup. And if he's in the starting lineup, he should be good to go here. Though he does have a little bit of a lower floor than I would like, but his price point is pretty fair, and he's averaging 22 fantasy points per game this season. So now we'll get into the forwards that I like today, and we're going to start with Udeze for New Mexico. He just seems pretty solidly priced here. He's averaged 30 fantasy points a game on the season. Now, he's a little bit higher than I would like, but he's really solid. He plays 33 minutes per game most of the time, and he's been getting double-doubles a lot recently. He should be in a great matchup and a good option for this slate. Then we'll look at Jalen Wilson, who's one of the highest expensive players on the slate for Kansas. He's been absolutely dominating lately. Do keep in mind he might be a little beat up from the last game, but overall he is in a great spot. I think he's a great play on the slate. He's only had 2 sub-30 fantasy point games all season long, and in the last 2 games he's been over 40 fantasy points in both. Obviously his price is super high, but he is viable on the slate because he's a double-double machine. Then we'll look at Alec from New Mexico. Sorry for butchering your name, Josiah Alec, I guess. He is basically the PJ Washington or the Aaron Gordon of college basketball. He has a very low floor, but he has a very high ceiling. He also gets big minutes. As you can see, averages 23 fantasy points per game, and he's had some games where he's been sub-10, but he's also had games over 30. So we're not really sure what we're going to get from him, but this is a high-scoring game, one of the highest-scoring games on the slate. and he should get plenty of minutes. So I think he's a viable option on the slate. Then we'll look at Flo Thamba for Baylor. He's one of the few guys from Baylor I thought had some upside. He's got a couple games under 10 fantasy points all season long, only a few, so he's got some nice upside here. He's relatively safe, I guess. He's not a great play, but he's not a bad play. It is a tough matchup, but it should be high scoring just the same and tight, and so I think he's viable on the slate. And then last but not least, we're going to look at Justin Mutz for Virginia Tech. Now, he is averaging 33 fantasy points per game. I wish he was a little bit less expensive, somewhere around $7,500, but he's viable here. And if you need somebody to offset from Wilson instead, he could be somebody you would take a look at. He doesn't always get he does get a bunch of assists, rebounds, and steals, which definitely helps boost his fantasy output, which explains his price. But it is still pretty expensive, so do keep in mind you do kind of want to utilize him as like a utility forward if you just need to spend $8,400. So with that said, guys, thank you again for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.